Hello and welcome to the Average Coder community. In this C# lesson, we are going to learn methods and functions. Right. In this C# tutorial, we are going to talk about method and function. So, what are methods and what are functions? Basically, it's same thing. The only difference between method and function is that method is part of a class when function isn't. But you will be writing almost all of your function inside of the classes in C# language, so it doesn't really matter how you call it. So let's talk about why do you need methods and functions. Let's imagine a situation when you have a part and code that you want to do more than one time. And yes, you may say we have cycles and we can do it by using them. But what if you have to copy paste cycles a lot of times? Yeah, or you have to put this code in different places. For example, if you are writing for cycle, it's going to repeat. If you write in for cycle, it's going to repeat only between these brackets. But what if you have to print it right over here? Then write some code, and after some code you have to do it again. For cycle can do it. So that's the reason why you need method. So now let's talk about how you can create it. So to create method, for now, let's put public. You have to consider it as things that you have to put always before the function or method, at least for now. I will explain what does it mean and what does it do probably after one or two videos, so just wait for it. And after printing this word, let's give it data type. It's going to be int. So after it, you have to call this function. Let's call it x. Then you're going to put these brackets and curly brackets. So we created a function. Now you can put some code between these curly brackets, and to do it, let's do some code over here. Int x equals 5, for example, x plus plus, and return x. So we created x that equals 5, increase it by 1, and specific thing about the functions, if it has any data type except for y data type, then it's have to return an result. So now let's do some work. So console write line, and now we gonna have to call this function. So let's put here x, create int x that equals, and to call data type you have to write its name, brackets, and now we will be calling this function. So what does it going to do? it's going to create variable int, then it's going to increase it by 1 and return it by x. So what does it mean basically? If it's returning a value, then this means that on this place it's going to print value of this variable. Alright, I hope it makes sense. So 5 increased by 1 and it's going to return 6. So then it's going to put value of this x inside of this x and it's going to print it. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but it's much more easier when let's call it xa. It doesn't like the name of it. It's compiler confuse some. Right, so as you may see, we have 6 right over here. Right, put static and public together. I will explain again what does it do later. I forgot about static. So this function xa returned 6. So yeah, now what I have to mention: variables that are created in one function doesn't exist in another. So if we created x inside of this function, then this x doesn't exist inside of another function. So that's the reason why we have to create x again in this function, because this x and this x doesn't exist for each other. Basically, this function doesn't know about existing this x, and this function doesn't know about existing this x. Alright? So you may change this data type for float, for example, and so on. Float dot 5f, and now it's going to float. Now it's going to return 6.5. Right, so now let's talk about void. So if you are writing void type, then this means that this function doesn't return anything. For example, you may use it to print something, or I don't know. For example, you may ask somebody for console readline and then you may want to print console write line. Then you may want to print this string, and to call this function you have to put it just like so. So basically it means that on this place it's going to copy and paste this code. So if we run it, sorry, there's no such variable as x anymore because I deleted it. And if we run it and print something like it, we're going to have it again. So now let's talk about main function. This thing doesn't have to be in here. We can delete it. Program's still going to work just fine. So Yeah, compiler would put it without put it definitely. So now let's talk about main function. So main function is really important thing in programming because this function basically is the beginning of the program. So when you start executing the program or a program, then its compiler will search for this function and then it's going to execute code that is written right over here. So if I delete it, we're gonna end up with mistakes or nothing's good. Yeah, it's gonna tell us that we forgot about main function because it have to be, but if we comment this part of code or delete it even, so if we run it, then nothing gonna happen because its main function is empty. It doesn't call another functions, right? So xa, if we run it again, now it's going to call this function. Main function is the beginning of your program, so you have to know it. You have to remember it well. Now let's talk about this brackets. So inside these brackets, you will be putting value variables. For example, you want to enter some kind of data inside of that function and then work with that function inside of your and then you may want to work with the data inside of a function. So to do it, let's write int x, then after comma you're going to call then we're going to create another variable, but notice that after comma you have to call its data type again. If you are creating variables, then you don't have to call its data type again, even if they have same data type. But between these brackets, you have to call it. You have to call it definitely. So now let's print x plus y, and now we are going to print right over here 5, 7. So it's going to put this 5 on the place of x and this 7 on the place of y. If we have another variable, then after this comma you're going to call this variable again, and it will put this value inside of this variable that we have to create. So be careful and put comma, not dot, like in float. So now if we run it, we're going to end up with 12. 'Alright, now it's practice time. So I have written code already, and now we are going to think what's gonna happen in this code. So when we start a program, then is the computer going to search for main function. When it will find it, it's going to execute code between these curly brackets. So now we are creating array and putting inside of this variable what this function is going to return. So now it's search for this function, and this function takes size of the array. It creates array random and generates random numbers. Then it will store in this array with this size, and after it's going to return array that is filled with random numbers and store it inside this variable. Then we're going to create another array, second array, but with different size of the array. After it's going to call this void function. So let's search for it, this void function. So it takes array, and as you may see, it prints element of the array. So yeah, due for each cycle. So we printed elements. Now we have this console write line to divide the elements of the first and second element array by using the space. And so as you may see, we are doing this here and here. So we're dividing the numbers. We're trying to make some space between the numbers to be able to differentiate arrays. So now we going to store inside of the array the result of this function with data that is in array right now. So let's go for this function, and it's going to return array, as you may see, by this data type, and it takes array inside. So this going to sort array. So from the lowest element to the biggest. So we are creating integer help. You will see why we need it, and boolean run. So now we have infinite cycle, and this cycle is going to run if we found any. So all these things supposed to sort elements of array from the lowest to the maximum. So basically what is going to happen in here? So we start while cycle. So then it puts run as false because we don't want to run while again, and cycle 4 is going to begin. This thing prints the length, the size of the array -1, because we don't we need to do -1 because we don't want to go outside of the array, or other way we are going to end up with mistake. So now we are checking if the element from I is higher than next element. If it's higher, we're going to change places of these elements, and yeah, so that's why we need help to change elements. So we're storing this element inside of this variable, then we're storing this inside this variable, and then we're storing the value of this variable inside of this. So we change the places of this variable, and we set run again true. So basically, if it found that there is at least one element that isn't sorted yet, then it's going to go through this process again. If that's no such thing, then it's gonna stop this cycle and return sorted array and store it inside of this variable and print it. So if we run this code, we're going to have 10 element array. So let's count it: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 5 element array: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we have sorted 10 element array from the lowest to the highest number, and the sorted array with size 5, and yeah, we have sorted it again. So yeah, I hope you can understand it. Thank you for coming, and if you like this video, then hit the like button, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget about checking the description, because you're going to have some tasks that you're going to have to do on your own, and write it down, write your answers down in the comments. I will look at them, maybe even try to help you if you have some problem and so on. So thank you for joining me today. Bye. See ya.